Hey, it's Rebecca, and you are listening to Resilient by Design. Today, I interview Etel from Blossom CPA. She is a local accounting and bookkeeping service that is a wealth of knowledge. I actually met Etel here at the Collective Workspace. She today really goes into a lot of detail that I hope will be very valuable. My goal was really to empower you after this conversation to sort of have a better, clearer sense of how you can manage the financials in your business, and especially how you can set up your design business for success. We talk about whether or not you should incorporate, what that means, and the reasons why you would want to do that. When you should possibly think about outsourcing your bookkeeping. What's the deal with audits? What are the typical types of audits that interior designers see? I share my own personal experience with an audit. We talk about a sole proprietor, and then software. We talk about the value in the softwares that you can use, the ones I use, the ones that she's familiar with working and experienced working with. And then lastly, at the end, she's got some really great tips for sole proprietors when it comes to the end of the year and how to, especially like some new ones that I hadn't even thought about, but what really is considered revenue. And there's certain elements and certain things that you can actually defer to the next year. She talks about credit cards, setting up bank accounts. And then I forced her to give a few definitions to a couple of terms that I know it took me a while to learn what they meant. And so I thought that would be helpful. Woo! Guys, it's full of lots of great nuggets. Give it a listen. All right. I'm Rebecca Hay, and I've built a successful interior design business by trial and error, podcasts, online courses, and so many freaking books. Over the last decade, I've grown from an insecure student to having false starts to careers, and now I'm finally in the place where I want to be. Throughout my journey, it's been pretty obvious that I'm passionate about business and helping other entrepreneurs do the same. Each week, I'll share tangible takeaways from my own experience and the experiences of other badass women to help you build your confidence and change your business. Are you as tired as I am working in a bubble? I mean, shoot. It's time to maybe socially distance with other people. That is why I love coming to the Collective Workspace. If you are someone who is looking for a little bit of stimulation, a lot of beauty, the Collective Workspace is a really great place to go. It is a co-working space for designers, architects, and builders in Toronto, and they're opening a second location this spring. They have flex workspace and offices starting at $120 a month. There's boardrooms, a podcast booth, which is where I am right now, concierge, storage, and a trade-only design library. You can find out more, or if you want to book a tour, go to thecollectiveto.com. Okay, I am here with Etel. How do you say your last name? Igreda?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, I got it on the first try.
Yeah, you got it. Yes.
Welcome to the podcast, Etel. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here. Definitely.
We first met at the Collective Workspace, which is actually where we both are right now, but we're in two totally separate enclosed rooms because it's a pandemic, which is a shame because it's like you're like several walls over and I can't actually see you in person. But we first met here, right? I think was I hosting an event or I was just in the kitchen or something? I can't really remember when we got to talk.
I remember the kitchen was involved. There was food involved. It was good times.
Yeah, I think it may have been one of my designer meetup events that I had. I don't know. And you were here, we started chatting and I was like, oh, bookkeeping, accounting, numbers, like tell me more. I need to know more about your services. So I'm excited to have you on today and just kind of dive into a lot of your knowledge because finances can be daunting. I know as a designer starting out, I was a hot mess. Like, the shoebox full of receipts. That was me.
Yeah.
It was me. Come tax time, I was like, I don't even know what to make of all of this. I don't want to even look at it. Just send it over to somebody to deal with. So let's maybe start off by you introducing yourself to everybody who's listening and let them know who you are. What's your story?
Sure. So my name is Etel Igreda, as you already presented me very well there. I am the founder and director of Blossom CPA. We work specifically with creatives, particularly with designers, architects, and just creatives in general. We think that we are a really good match together. You guys bring all the creativity and the enthusiasm and the many ideas and projects, and we bring a little bit of the organization or a lot of the organization, right? So yeah, that's basically what we do as a team. I have a team that work with me, and we do the gamut from bookkeeping to filing tax returns for either corporations or the owners of those corporations, right? And how it started, I've been in business for about close to 18 years, but as my own firm, it's been about 10 years. And I started working for corporate. I didn't really find professional happiness, and I still wanted to work with people, and I still wanted to make a difference, because I think that's bottom line what we're looking for, make a difference in somebody else's lives, their business being so close to us, right? So that's why I started my practice, and I love it. I love it. Not every day is the same, and it's good. It's good. Yes.
Awesome. I love that you love that business, because I do not. So this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's dive in. I really want to show designers, or learn today, and maybe even help me, how they can set their design business up for financial success. I know as designers, we're focused mostly on the creative, and the business side doesn't always come naturally. And then the financial bit is like even after that. So I think a great place to start would be, how do you know? I get this question all the time. How do you know whether or not you should incorporate your business or stay a sole proprietor?
Mm-hmm. There's a few points there that I think they're really important, that we really want to highlight, right? One is, if you have excess income that you don't really need to spend, then that's a really good point to say, okay, we should incorporate, because you open up yourself to deferring your taxes. Okay, so that basically means, instead of paying on this huge amount of income that we made for the year, then I can put it off, pay it, and the smaller tax rate that the corporation, being a small business deduction, less than 500,000, is able to do. And then I only take a payroll or a dividend that is taxed at a much lesser percentage, only because in relation to the full income that we made. Okay.
Yeah. So you pay corporate. You pay corporate. Just to put this into layman's terms, you pay corporate tax on the money you collected, but it stays in the bank account, and you don't use that money to pay yourself.
Correct.
Right? Is what you're saying?
Exactly.
So if you're a designer, and at the end of the year, you're like, I still have $50,000 in the bank account that I don't technically need to pay myself right now. And if you're incorporated, then you pay a smaller percentage of tax on that money. Right. And then you only pay more tax on it if you pay yourself. Correct?
Exactly. So so basically, if the business made 50,000, say in total, then like you said, it was left at the end of the year in your net income, right? For the business, you're only being taxed at 12%. Right now, it's 12.20 for 2021. It's 12.20%. Whereas if that same amount of money was transferred completely into your bank account as a sole proprietorship, you would be taxed there at a much higher rate, right? 30-something%, right? So there is that difference. And you can put that money to work in different ways, right? You can invest it within the corporation. Again, it's paying less taxes because it's a smaller tax rate than if you were to do the same, taking it out and investing it under your individual's name. right? So those would be one of the obvious advantages. Another one would be the fact that you are not completely 100% liable for all the business debt, right?
What does that mean? That to me is like blah, 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 blah. Can you break
what
that
does
down?
Sure. So what that means is if the corporation was to dissolve, right, and you owed suppliers, by the court of law, you would need to pay your suppliers based on what is left in the corporation. So it's limited to what you invested in the corporation, right? But if that was a sole proprietorship, they can access your car, your home to pay all those creditors that you still owe. So that would be another reason, right?
The only added protection in a way.
Exactly. So that would be an added protection for yourself. The only thing that you're still not protected from is CRA. So if the corporation owed payroll liabilities or GST, HST, even when the corporation is dissolved, the individual is still responsible, the shareholder. So they will look up, okay, who signed that articles of incorporation? That person will be followed up with that debt. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So when I incorporated, my company's incorporated. When I incorporated several years ago, they asked for all the shareholders to put their information. I was like, shareholders? This sounds fancy. I mean, it's just me, but that makes sense. So I am the sole shareholder in my own company. So I would still owe whatever tax is owed to. In Canada, it's the CRA. It's different in different countries. In the US, I guess it's the IRS. There's different. So you have to check within your own tax law within your own country, obviously, but that's how it works in Canada. Interesting. Okay. I hope we don't have designers that want to dissolve, but you just never know. I mean, you never know what's going to happen.
And I mean, it could happen, for instance, that you go into a corporation with another designer, right? But then you decide, okay, you know what, we're going to part ways. So you would need to dissolve that corporation, right? That would be an instance.
Got it. Totally. That makes sense. And you see that happening. A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to partner. This is going to be so great. You know, two heads are better than one, extra creative, extra reach for our marketing. But then sometimes it doesn't work out. Partnerships can be tricky. So that's interesting. Okay. What other reasons would we want to incorporate?
The other reason basically is, and we touched upon this, it's basically the tax deferral, right? That we feel that, okay, we can put off paying taxes because our business is doing well enough that I don't really need to access all this money right now, right? So those would be the main differentiators. So there's more tax planning available. Then here we can start talking about the different entities. So there could be like a number of level of structures that you can build up upon it, almost like a Lego. Okay. So not to make it too complex, but you have more structures available, and that could allow you to defer taxes more, right? So that's kind of why people incorporate mainly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just kind of did it. I think initially when I asked my accountant, and I was like year 1 or 2 of my business, he was like, no, it's not worth it. Don't do it. You're going to have to pay all this extra money and And I didn't do it. And then eventually I did do it. And now that I'm growing my organization, I'm quite glad I did it because I can keep money in the corporation. And I have it in a savings account. I don't invest it. Maybe I could, but right now it's just in a savings account. So it makes a little bit of interest. And I like the separation of the company from me. I can pay myself. I pay myself. Full disclosure here, because that's what this podcast is all about. You guys want to know how I pay myself? This is how I do it. I pay myself partially on salary. So my corporation has me on like a standard salary. And then anything above that, I would pay myself what's called a dividend. And a dividend is a lower tax rate, but the bulk of my paying myself is on salary. Part of that is just helps with forecasting for numbers for me. Also, that I'm contributing to EI, a little bit of money stashed away for the future, not a lot. And there's certain tax benefits. So I know for one thing, for me, with having childcare expenses, if I was to be solely on dividends, I wouldn't be able to claim any of the childcare benefits or get a tax break. So that was part of I had two little children at the time. And so very high childcare expenses. And so that was a real incentive for me. We did the math and it made sense to do it. I would encourage anybody who's on the fence and trying to figure out if it works for them, get someone to help you do the math. Like get an accountant, get a bookkeeper to kind of look and really crunch the numbers and see based on your business model, based on the money that you're making, based on where you are at. Do not take my advice. You don't have to do what I did, but take the advice of people like Etel and other professionals to make sure that you're making the right educated choice for your business.
Right. So at the end, I really feel like you mentioned we need to look at who you are, what's going on in your life. Do you have a partner? Do you have children? Do you need to access other credits? It's not just about, I've been told I need to incorporate and that's it. It's not for everybody, because at the end, you may just be breaking even, and there's responsibilities that come with being incorporated. Like what I mentioned in terms of what you said, sometimes what I've seen is people, sometimes they incorporate and they think that it's just like the sole proprietorship. They don't realize that they should be paying themselves payroll. They're withdrawing all kinds of money from their business. And then when it comes to year end and they take it to an accountant, the accountant is going to say, so this is how much you owe CRA to report on your salary that you've taken every other week, right? And they're not ready. They did not know this, right? So it's just having that preparation, understanding what you're getting yourself into, and then you have to file a corporate tax return at a different time of the year. Another responsibility, which is very, it can be very helpful to have, and you have to do it. It's necessary, right? But sometimes people, they don't realize this, and 2 years go by, and then they're like, oh, I got a letter. I need to file my corporate tax return, right?
Turns out I think the government wants something from me. It's so strange.
Yeah, why are they sending me a letter?
Totally.
Right?
I mean, it does cost a little bit more in accounting fees. At least I've noticed that, because I do file. It's two separate times of the year for me too. My fiscal, what's called the fiscal year for my business, is not the same as a calendar year, which works to my benefit in certain ways, but it can be a little bit confusing. So there's a little bit of an additional cost. But back to what you just said, Etel, I think that's really important to sort of highlight, is that idea of just drawing money from your company, whether it's biweekly, monthly, randomly. I used to do that both as a sole proprietor and when I was incorporated. It was like, I need money. Transfer. All my accounts were connected. I just recently separated them so that others on my team could have access to the business account. But it was like, oh my gosh, like I have to pay my mortgage and my nanny. And so I was like, oh, quick $5,000, quick draw. And then it was tax time. And they were like, you owe $12,000 in income tax.
The remittance. Yeah, the remittance is from your... Right, from your payroll that you took from your payroll.
Well, before I was even incorporated, there was no payroll. It was just, I guess you could call it that, but I owed money.
Right.
And guess what?
Right.
I didn't have the money. So what I did, which I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to this, I was like, well, I have money in my bank account for the business. So, okay. So I'll just use that to pay the taxes. Well, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So you're pulling from your future income. And so it's like this constant game of playing catch up. And the reason I bring this up is that I know I'm not alone. And I was what accountants refer to as in the red. Like I was in the red for several years, which meant I actually wasn't making money as a business. I didn't even see it until like at the end of the year when all of a sudden I owed tax money and I didn't have it. So you have to be really careful. And for me, setting up the corporation was a bit of a help because it forced me to start to learn a little bit more, pay more attention to the numbers. It's also just a learning curve, I think. I didn't really have somebody guiding me, someone like you, for like the first 5 years of my business, telling me and showing me how it was done. So there's a lot of value in that. Actually, that kind of segues me into a next question I have for you, which is like, when should designers start to outsource their bookkeeping or their accounting? Like, when is a good time if somebody has just started out or they've been doing this for 10 years and it's just been them all along and they finally are like, maybe I should hire someone? Like, how do you know, A, if you can afford it, or B, if you really need it?
Mm-hmm. How you know if you really need it is when you can't really explain why, when you go to file your taxes, they say that you made money, but your bank account is a negative. That happens a lot, unfortunately. When you don't know, you receive money, you invoiced, you got a deposit, and as soon as you got it, it's back to red because you have to pay all your suppliers and all your contractors, and there's no money left, even for yourself. I mean, those are unfortunately extreme situations, but I mean, depending on your level of comfort, like how extreme is extreme for you may be different than other people, right? I mean, if you're running something that is pretty steady, you have a good idea of your cash flow, you are managing your payables and your receivables well enough, then maybe you don't really need to hire somebody full-time or even part-time. You just want to touch base with somebody to review that. I mean, I think that nowadays there's all that kind of access available, right? That an accountant would go over it with you and you can ask questions every, quarter or once every 6 months, right? It's just, you need to be able to understand what you're looking at or why things don't make sense to you, right? And I think that when you have a question, that's when you should be reaching out. And you cannot answer it yourself, obviously.
Yeah. For me too, it was, I didn't even realize how useful it would be to have someone help with the books until I had that person. And for me, the biggest thing is, like you say, is knowing the numbers earlier. So like knowing where we're at sooner than the end of the year. Because when I didn't have someone helping me, I didn't see everything until the end of the year. I had no idea if we were profitable. I mean,
and you couldn't correct. Right. And I mean, in the sense of the corporation, you couldn't correct how you were acting, how you were behaving, because it's a behavioral issue a lot of times, right? Because nobody is highlighting these things with you, right? So this is where it's really nice to have that sort of partnership if it can be afforded, obviously. But I mean, if it's a business that you feel, okay, I know how much money I make, I know that I'm paying people on time, I know that I'm getting paid on time, I know that I have an emergency fund, I know that I can pay CRA on time, then I think that you're running pretty smoothly. That's good news.
One of the best things that happened to me was, and it doesn't seem like a good thing at the time, is having to remit taxes before they're due. So like, this is something that, if you don't know what I mean, it's instead of waiting till the end of the year to pay a lump sum to the government says, okay, well, now you need to send us money in advance. So like every quarter you have to send us money, for example. And it might
installments, right?
Installments, like installment payments. And that it's hard. Having a bookkeeper has been instrumental in knowing what I need to pay. I mean, the government will sometimes tell you, but it's been amazing. So the best thing that literally just happened to me is I filed my year end and the government owed me money. I was like,
you were like, oh, I'm getting a refund.
No, and I was like, I don't even want the refund. Can you just roll that into next year? Because like, I always want to make sure, because I had so many years where I was in the red and I owed money and I couldn't catch up. I love being ahead. So like being able to pay and some people won't agree with this. I know someone in my life who was like, don't give them money until they absolutely need it. And like, they wait till the last minute to pay their electrical bill, to pay their property taxes. I'm not like that. I like to know that everything is taken care of. I don't want to pay interest. I don't want to pay penalties. And having a bookkeeper or an accountant in your life can help you really stay on top of that. That's what I found.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the role, right? To keep your business in control, so that you know that somebody else is looking out for all these deadlines. Somebody else is keeping you up to date. If there is a notice, if there is an audit, I mean, unfortunately, those happen, right? Have you ever been audited by CRA?
So I had an audit. It wasn't like a full business audit, but it kind of shook me. It was an audit for my car expenses because I use my car as a designer, not in pandemic, but as a designer, I would use my car like all the time. And so I said to my accountant, I was like, well, I'm going to claim, I don't know what, I think I said 90%. I'm like, 90% of well, you laugh, just you listen. So, and she laughed at me too. She was like, there's no way they're going to go for that. I'm like, it's the freaking truth. 90% of because my husband also has a car, right? So on the weekends, we're not using my car. We're using his car to go north and go to the cottage and go do errands. And so I said, no, seriously, I think 90% of my car use. She's like, okay, well, just be prepared. Well, they came a-calling and they were like, you need to prove this. And guess what? I freaking proved it. I had every single month. It was in Google. Good. I passed the test, and now they're not going to come and they're like, oh man, she's a waste of our time. She's so organized. Now I will tell you, I had to go back through my Google Calendar and like document all of those trips and look up the kilometers. It was painstaking, but I felt so gratified that I was like, you see, I do use it for 90%. Now, since then, the car is now in a company name because I use it majority for work. And that was something that my accountant helped me figure out whether that was a good call to do. But yeah, so I had that experience of an audit. I didn't have humans coming in. It wasn't like on television where humans came into my office and like went through my paperwork.
They don't do that anymore.
Oh, they don't? Okay.
Unless you were a major corporation. Right. Yeah. No, but definitely, I mean, and again, good on your accountant who spotted that. They said, hey, this is going to look suspicious, because that's one of the things that I also do with clients, because we advise clients, but we cannot stop you from doing what you want to do with your business. It's your business at the end, right? So never think that an advisor...
I'll show you.
But you know what? Exactly. But this is exactly it. I think that relationship has evolved so much, and there's a lot of accountants, at least the peers and the colleagues that I talk to. We kind of work in a partnership with our clients. So we let you know, for instance, like this is gonna maybe trigger an audit. And how many times I said it, and they're like, don't say that, Etel, because if you say it, that's probably going to come true. And then a few months later, then it happens. But I mean, you were warned. We prepared you. If we have strong files, we have all the backup, all the information to be provided. It's just a hassle, but it's not going to cost you any money, right? Mm-hmm. So that's good. That's good. You were able to prove it.
Yeah. But I've heard someone say like, every business at some point in their lifespan will get audited. I don't know.
You know what? Because they do. I don't know if that's true or not. But the fact is that they go through. Oh, you know what? There was a year where it was consulting fees. So if you had reported anything under consulting fees, they wanted to see every invoice that you paid under consulting fees. Or meals and entertainment. There was one year where meals and entertainment were like the audit, right? So these are things that as you're working in the industry, you get to know. You're like, oh, this year is this. Have you already been audited, or one of your clients audited on this? And, you know,
what is it this year? What's it going to be? I know what it's going to be. I'm going to tell you. I can tell you exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be the pandemic-related wage subsidies and the CERB. I think that once this settles down, they're going to go back after everyone who took money from the government, and they're going to make sure that you were telling the truth, because they gave out that money so quickly and so easily. I would be shocked if they don't go on a mission to get some of that back. I know that sounds so awful of me to say, but I really do think that's going to happen.
So I tell you how that your theory makes sense, because that's why the T4s have been modified this year. So that if you notice, there's new boxes at the bottom, 57, 58, 59, and 60. So those, if the business that you are an employee had taken wage subsidy support for you, and you claim CERB, say, in those months, then that's how they're going to catch people that took CERB, but also the business got wage subsidy for those people that supposedly were not working.
So who's on the hook for that? Like, as a business, I don't know if my employees, like, I did collect the wage subsidy. I don't know if they also collected.
It would be individually, because it's going on their T4, right? Under their SIN number, right? So yeah, I mean, you cannot know what people are doing in front of their computers when they have CRA access, and it was an easy phone call, right, to make. So yeah,
interesting. Something I wanted to talk about. Come on, Rebecca. What was it? Ooh, auditing, getting audits. Okay, so I shared that I was audited for my car expenses. What are other types of audits that designers tend to get? I'm just super curious. Like, what are red flags that you mentioned, like food and beverage or entertainment? Like, can you just give us some examples?
GST, HST is one that you really have to be careful about, right? Because if, say, for instance, it's the first year of business and you're asking for a refund, they're probably going to want to audit your first filing just to make sure that you're not claiming something that doesn't belong there. So yeah, unfortunately, the way our system...
Sorry, just to break that down, you mean you're collecting HST on products and services. And
right.
if there might be an audit if that you're saying that you paid out more than you collected? Is that what you mean?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you're actually asking for a refund. So it's my first year as my corporation ABC design. And I'm saying, oh, you know what? I actually should be getting a refund. Oh, that's great, ABC design. Let's just have a look at your biggest invoices, your largest 10 invoices, your largest 10 ITCs, the whole file of all your of every item that you've claimed, right? And from there, they can gather, okay, is this mainly meals, for instance, okay? And then they'll be like, okay, if this is mainly meals, let's have a look at your meals. Like, who did you take out? Because you're supposed to list down in that receipt who you took out, how was this a business meal and not a personal, right?
Well, the good thing is, in a pandemic, there's not going to be a lot of that.
Yes.
Yeah, although I have a lot of Uber Eats. I do a lot of Uber Eats for my team. So I don't know.
Yeah,
doesn't add up to very much, though, over the year, I don't think.
Right. So that would be one that I've noticed a lot for new businesses that just incorporate. And the first year, of course, there is a higher chance of you getting a refund simply because you're just starting out and you're investing a lot. So you're buying a lot of either supplies or softwares or contractors that charge you HC. So you're investing a lot in the business, and then that's why you may be getting or requesting a refund as opposed to paying something to CRA, right? Mm-hmm. Then that would be basically like the biggest thing that they're doing right now. They honestly, last year, because of the pandemic, they stopped auditing because everybody, with everything that was happening. And now they're really what I've noticed is they're really in the mood of collecting. So anything that you owe, that it's been outstanding, they're not really auditing, but they are more trying to collect.
Interesting.
So this is the time when, if you know you're behind, if you haven't filed your returns, file them, even if you cannot pay it. Like, that is the number one thing that I can share with everybody. Like, just file. I know it may seem scary. Maybe you're not as organized as you should have been. Take your time, organize yourself, file, and then you can have the conversation about how your payment plan, right? Because now that's what they're open to, right? A lot of payment plan, they've always been open to that, right? But I think it's really important in these times that people really take that in and accept it. By not even filing, you're putting more of a spotlight on yourself.
Interesting. Thank you. That's really good to hear, because I think there's probably people out there who are like, oh, like I'm not going to file because I need to make sure that I have the money to pay what I owe, and I But you'll get, you are penalized. Now that, as you say, it could be a red flag for auditing, but it's also, you get penalized, right? Don't you have to pay a fine if you file late?
Exactly. So you already are just
and
increasing the interest, late filing fees. So I think that that's really important for this year. The only thing that's come down for the pipeline for individuals, since we're on this topic specifically, is if you have earned net income of less than 75,000 and you've accessed any of the subsidies, the individual subsidies, so CERB, CRB, CSCSB. Well, there's a number of them, right? Then you will be able to not have to pay interest-free until April 30th, 2022. So you're given an extra year to pay. Okay. So this is really, again, you can only access this if you file on time. So you have to file on time, right? And then you have a full extra year to pay whatever you owe. But you need to file.
Honestly, I highly value hiring a professional to help you in whatever realm, because for me, if my accountant didn't send me an email and a nudge and say, it's almost time to file, Rebecca, can you review this thing? I would have no idea. I'd be in the clouds. It would be July. And I'd be like, yeah, everything's fine. What?
Yeah, of course.
So there's so much value, especially since I'm not passionate. I'm going to be like really kind on myself right now and just say I'm not passionate about numbers. I'm trying to get out of this like head trash that I have about my relationship with money and numbers. So I just don't love them. But I am learning. It's just not something that I want to focus my energy on. And I think a lot of designers are probably like me. Like, the last thing I want to do is sit down and look at the books and figure out where we're at and how much do I owe? And like, I try to keep things in file. Like even then, I'm like, what? Didn't I already pay that? I feel like I'm always paying the government something, whether it's personal income tax, corporate income tax, HST, payroll, like all the things. That's the other thing. So we use a payroll service. So if somebody is looking to bring an employee onto payroll, you can do it yourself, but we work with a payroll service so that we don't have to, so that I don't have to do it.
Right. So that's the other thing. Like nowadays, because I mean, there's enough accounting softwares online that you can access. There's some of them are free. Then there's enough material to learn how to do simple bookkeeping, right? And by this, I really mean like the most important everyday tasks, you can actually learn them. Of course, if you're starting out, that would be probably the best way to start. But I would always suggest have somebody review this quarterly, half the year through, just so that you have some sort of comfort. And then they can tell you, you know what, you're doing this wrong. And this is how you need to do it. And that way you feel a little more prepared come tax time, right? Because at the end, that's it. Like you said, you forget about it. And of course, we all forget about things that we don't like doing, right? We just shove it in the right. So that's normal.
Okay, so I want to get away from tax time because I feel like I know it's tax time. Is it tax time right now? I don't know. Must be.
It is.
Yeah. Okay. That's what we're talking about. I think that probably the regular everyday designer is not thinking about tax time. I think that's what accountants are always thinking about that. Like, oh, I want to show them how we can this is what you need to do for tax time. I think that the everyday designer, and designers, you can correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, but this was my experience. We're really more than anything obsessed with the day-to-day of running the business
Absolutely.
and making sure we're entering things accurately, using the right programs. There's so much chatter in the design industry about which program are you using? What are you using? How do you use it? How do you do purchase orders? Well, how do you close off this sale? How do you know like your profit margin? Da, 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 da. So maybe we can just talk for a minute about, you mentioned softwares. I personally use Design Docs. I've used it since the inception of my business. But I know there are a lot of different programs out there. Can you speak to, the value in those programs and how they help designers on a daily basis? And then I'm curious, even just in your company, which programs do you work with the most? Like, what are you the most familiar with? I can say from my experience, none of them are perfect, but I will tell you that having something like we use Design Docs where all that data is entered and as opposed to an Excel, because I know a lot of designers who still just used Excel, then they just create random invoices in QuickBooks or FreshBooks or something like that. I love being able to actually manually enter all of the information, because then it's come tax time or every month or every quarter, I can quickly pull a report on anything. I can see how much HST we're going to need to owe. I can see what our profit margin was. I can see which months were stronger, which months were less. And it's a click of a button, as opposed to kind of not knowing where we're at.
Right.
What are you
having to recreate? And having to recreate. So that is, like, to your point about Excel, that is the biggest shortcoming, right? Because if they wanted to figure exactly how well they did last month or a comparison between months, they couldn't do that easily, right? So, I mean, softwares are really important. They facilitate everything that you do nowadays, right? And you can have everything, expenses and sales all together. So whichever one that people decide to start with, especially if they're just starting out, I think that that's great. There's a lot of choices out there. We use mainly, or we support businesses mainly with FreshBooks and QuickBooks Online. But there is a ton of other ones out there that will do, I think, the most important jobs, which are basically have a profit and loss report by week, by month, by year, have an HST, GST, HST balance ready to be looked at. They all integrate with Payroll. So if you want to run Payroll and see it all flow in, you can also have Payroll integrated there. They can also integrate with vendor apps so that you can pay them. So if we enter the bill, so the purchase order then turns into a bill, and then you're ready to pay it, it's due, then a lot of our clients, they basically, we send them a list, right? That is, okay, approve, and then the money starts going out to those vendors, right? So this is the beauty of all these accounting softwares, the integrations. I think that that's really what makes them a favorite, right? To have them all in one spot, so that once you run a report, it tells you everything: how much your payroll was, how much your accounts payable is, how much is still in receivables, right? So
that's been powerful for us, is being able to actually take the time. We do once a week. I sit down with Alyssa. I sit down and I stare at a freaking computer screen because everything's on Zoom. But we sit down and we look at our accounts payable. So what vendors do we have to pay based on the money that we've received? And our accounts receivable, which is what are the invoices that are sitting out there outstanding? What clients have an invoice from us and haven't paid? And that exercise, and this is maybe just a little tip for designers, just to work this into your weekly time blocking and your weekly, I mean, you don't have to do it weekly depending on how busy you are, but I find it's really helpful. Even if there's not a lot of change, I actually prefer that, because then you can really quickly see when something's new. And we just quickly have a half an hour meeting and we look through and we say, okay, well, Susie Q, I mean, she's had that invoice for a while. Like, what's going on? Why isn't she paying it? Oh, she's waiting for us to give her a refund or whatever it might be. Or say, hey, can you follow up with that client and just remind them that this needs to be paid before we can start into phase 2. Or if with the vendor payables, it's like, okay, wow, there's going to be a lot of money coming out of the account. Let me make sure I clear off my credit card so that we can use the credit card, because we use our credit card for almost every purchase, to make sure that there's space on that card, so that all the payments go through. So that has been a really effective tool. And I've really only started doing that very recently, but it only works if you use a program where you can pull that information from.
And somebody's actually updating. Okay, so this is another thing that's so important about that we just said, is that, okay, you have the accounting software, you bought it. Great. You're subscribed, you're paying for it monthly. You need to have, or yourself, input the information. Not input it, but do the backups. Have somebody constantly update it and actually make it in the books, right? Because having the software doesn't mean that it just goes on remote control, right? You need somebody to make sure that the connections are working, that the bank feed is pulling, that somebody's actually making that push so that the transactions get published, so that when you're pulling the reports are up to date. Because if that's not happening, I can show you an accounts payable report that you haven't updated the books in a month. So that's not going to tell you anything, because you're going to say, oh, but we already paid that. We already got a credit for that. Like, then what is that needing to us?
But that happens to us a lot. And in a way, that's what's been forced us to meet every week, because when we do meet, we'll print it. And then Alyssa will be like, oh, that's so weird. I thought I closed that off in the system. So it acts as checks and balances, because sometimes you think maybe you've taken care of something. And then you see when you generate that report, oh, like for some reason, it's not closed off in the system. Or I'll say like, I'm pretty sure I paid that vendor. Did it not go through? Like, what's going on? And so it allows you to be really on top of that. It's been really, for us at least, especially for me as the business owner, and I don't have my hands in every single daily operation anymore. So for me, it gives me a good idea of what's going on. But you are right. And I would say one of our biggest obstacles still is making sure that the vendor invoices are posted. So, we can print an accounts receivables report, payables, meaning like we have a big job in Muskoka. They've paid us for all the decorating. Great. The money's in the system. Great. But until we generate those purchase orders and we post them, I mean, I might be speaking out of turn, but I think that's how it works. It's not going to show up as money owed. And so I might look at that statement and be like, oh, wow, cool. Like, I've got all this money in my bank account. I don't owe any money. I mean, I'd have to be a bit of an idiot to forget that I just got a check for a couple $100,000. But at the same time, you have, like, you're so right. You have to make sure you're staying on top of it. And if you yourself are feeling overwhelmed as the designer and the sole proprietor, and you do not have the time to update it yourself, then it's probably worth investing in someone to help you. And whether it's a keeper, it could be a part-time administrator who's just doing that and then can facilitate with, like, Alyssa is our project coordinator admin. So she's updating design docs, but then she coordinates with our bookkeeper. We still have a bookkeeper who reconciles every month.
Right.
The downside
because you do need, because I was going to say that. Right. I was going to say about that, because you do need somebody who has expertise and experience, not only in the software that you're using, but in accounting terminology and correct use of the books, right? So that's really important. But I mean, to your point, I think that that's why it's so important to have reports by project and even by phase. So if you have those, then that really will keep your meetings to point, because you're like, okay, we have, for instance, 8 projects on the go. Let's look at project blah, 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 because I just got paid. Okay, let's see where we're at with the suppliers. How is that money trail moving, right? To get to that profit margin that it's supposed to be at this point in time, right? And maybe if it's wacky, you know why it's wacky, because you still haven't paid the vendors, or you are paying ahead. Because sometimes with your contractors, you pay deposits just to get them started, right? So just understanding all that is also really important. That's why you need those meetings.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're like, oh my God, Rebecca, can you just stop talking? I don't want to think about any of this stuff. This is so much. I feel you and I get it. I get you because that is me. And I'm still, that person is still inside of here. I've just forced myself little by little to learn and improve. And having the professional on my team as a bookkeeper, as an accountant, I'm constantly asking stupid questions. Full disclosure. I ask my accountant literally maybe every 2 weeks. I'll say, hey, can you explain that again? Like, I thought I already paid that. I'm sure she must think like, oh my God, Rebecca, like, how can you not wrap your head around the fact that this is this thing and this is the HST installment and it's not the same as the corporate. And like, because to her, it's so clear, right? It's like a designer saying, well, how do you not know the difference between laminate and vinyl flooring? Duh.
That's what happens to me.
There you go, right? We help each other out.
or colors. Like, I love colors, but don't you see the difference? No. Right. And that's a true story. Like, they show me like a couple of whites, of course, you guys and the whites. And I'm like, do you see the difference? Honestly, I do not. And, but I trust your knowledge and your experience to make the best decision for me with, the limited understanding that I have. Right. But, and you know what, I think that's what makes a good parent, because we get excited about all these numbers and how you should be paying attention to this and that and the other. And you're like, okay, maybe I don't really feel comfortable, but since you're so excited about it, tell me more, right?
Yeah, totally. Okay, we only have a couple more minutes. And I know I want to ask you before we sort of sign off about some of your tips that you have for sole proprietors, because I think a lot of people listening here are sole proprietors. But before we do that, I want to just talk terminology, because a couple things came up and I wrote them down in my paper that I realized maybe not everyone listening knows what they mean. So I'm going to ask you to give us a definition for two terms. First term, net income.
So net income is, you have your sales, 100,000. You have your expenses, 50,000. Well, I'll use another number, 60,000. Then your net income is 40,000. That is your net income.
Does that include tax?
That does not include tax, right? So tax goes at the bottom. So then we say from that 40,000, what is the provision for your tax due? So out of the 40,000, then we figure out if you're a sole prop or if you're a corporation, how much your tax would be. And then that becomes your net income after taxes, unfortunately.
So, because I always would get tripped up by this term. So net income, now I'm getting myself confused, is the money you make after you've paid your expenses.
Yes.
Right? Before you've paid your tax. Got it.
Correct.
Next, okay, we're moving on. Hope that's helpful for some of you. Next terminology is dividend. What is a dividend?
Okay, first, a dividend will not show up in your profit and loss or your balance sheet, if you guys are familiar. So balance sheet is that report that is almost like a picture that you take in time. So where are your balances in your bank accounts and what you owe as of that specific time, say September 30th. Okay, like a picture that day. So the next day it could have gone up and down. It doesn't matter as of that day. Okay. And profit and loss is the accumulated of the year, right? Or of the period that you're looking at. And the question was dividends. Dividends may not show up in any of those. Why? Because if, say, in 2019, you made, the business made or had accumulated in retained earnings, which is all the net incomes from the previous year, say 100,000, and you say, okay, I want to pay myself a dividend of 50,000 because I deserve it. I need this money and I want to go ahead and take it out. So that they take out from the those retainer earnings that were 100,000, they will take out 50,000 to pay your dividend payable.
Yeah. So the way I understand it is probably too simplified. A dividend is what you pay yourself when you're incorporated and you're not on payroll. Basically.
Yes, but you could still be on payroll and still get a dividend.
True. So I'm partially on payroll and I still take a dividend. But it means that the company is giving you money and they're not contributing on your behalf to EI, CPP, that's Canadian Pension Plan for any Americans.
Right. Okay.
Right? It's just straight money out of the corporation. It's almost like a bonus type of payment. It's a dividend that is paid to like big companies. They, at the end of their year, if there's money left over, they'll pay dividends, right, to their shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
Same concept.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to pay tax on those dividends that you collect.
Mm-hmm. Right. And like, you have to pay tax.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But from my understanding, the tax you pay on a dividend is less than...
Yes. It could be the rate, it could be less. But at the same time, let's understand that it gets balanced out because if you notice in your slip, the amounts, there's different amounts that show up. So it's the gross up. What you actually report is actually more because you're paying at a different tax rate, right? So it's
so freaking complicated. I know it doesn't have to be.
It's easier we had numbers.
Yeah. But essentially a dividend is when you pay the owner shareholder out of the company, right?
Correct. Yes. And that shareholder is going to pay in their personal taxes. As opposed to the payroll that who paid for your payroll deductions, it was the corporation.
So in a way, it's kind of double tax. So if you're a solo, right, and you're incorporated, you pay corporate income tax on the money that you make, right, as a company. Mm-hmm. And then after that tax is paid, you can pay yourself a dividend, but then personally, you have to pay tax on that dividend.
Mm-hmm. But at a different, exactly. But that is what they call the system being integrated. So they have figured out through formulas how to make sure that at the end you are paying the same, but you don't really realize it because the formulas are working in the background to make sure, right? The only benefit with corporations is what we talked about earlier, deferring. So putting off paying taxes, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe taking it out when you're making less money. Therefore, as an individual, you're paying less taxes than if you're claiming 200,000. Well, now you're claiming 50 every year, right?
Yeah. So I could say, I'm not going to take that 50,000 out of the company and pay myself this year, so I don't have to pay tax on it. Next year, maybe I'm going to take a sabbatical and I'll use that money to pay myself.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is a possibility that you have with a corporation, right? Wouldn't that be nice?
I'm going to take a sabbatical. Mark my words. 5-year goal plan is to take a 6-month sabbatical. I love it.
Where are you going to go?
I'm going to travel. I don't know where. It's not going to be in Canada. Nice. It's going to be anywhere else. I want to go to Nantucket. I'd like to go back to Spain. I'd like to go on safari in South Africa. I got lots of places I'm ready to go to. Just need an airplane.
Cool.
And a shot. And whatchamacallit.
Exactly. But you know what? Things are going to evolve anyway. So it will get easier. It's just, 5 years, it will get easier again.
It's a blip. Okay. So before we sign off, you have mentioned early on, well, actually before we got on this call, about sole proprietors, which I think most designers listening are. They're probably not incorporated. What are your tips for year end for sole proprietors?
Sure. So for one thing, we want to make sure for your year end that you have a good grasp of your revenue number, right? So you would not include in your revenue money that you collected as a deposit. Okay. That is not income. Okay. So that would be number one tip that I often see that people make that mistake per se, because they're like, oh, but I took the money. Yeah, but you have not delivered on the project. This is just a deposit, right? A retainer.
So then that would be number one, right? That's what you call
that gets deferred. Exactly. That gets deferred until the following year. And then the other thing.
That's common for designers, right? Because we often get a big deposit and we're not starting the project right away. And it might be your year end and you're like, oh my God, I collected all this money. Makes it look like I made so much money in 2019. But the reality is, no, that's actually money slated for 2020 because you're not going to start the work for another month or two. So that's a really good tip.
Right. So that would be number one. And number two is whenever possible, hopefully you have used your cards exclusively for business. That way you cannot miss any deductions, right? So when you mix them up and you're going through the statement and you're trying to figure out whether that was business or personal, it makes it really hard for you to remember, especially if you're going all the way back. So maybe, okay, it's water under the bridge per se for 2020, but for 2021, even if it's a personal card that you can exclusively use for expenses like a credit card, right? Exclusively use it for business, do so that you make your life so much easier because every single expense there belongs to your business and you don't miss any deductions like that.
That's right? So good. It's something that I do now all the time. I forget that I didn't used to. I used to have one credit card and I would go through and I would highlight, oh my God, memories. And I would highlight the business expenses, right? Yeah. This is what you're saying. And then finally I was like, maybe I should get a business credit card. And all of a sudden my life became so much easier.
Yeah. And it was easy for you to get it at the bank. Was it easier?
I don't remember.
Was it easy? No, you don't remember, but
probably.
Because it should be.
I think it was. I think I had a low limit to start with, and then I started kept asking for a higher limit and a higher limit.
I recommend people that especially if you get incorporated, along with opening your bank account, do request a credit card, and if they can give you a credit card, even if it's a low limit, like you said, just to start, and then it'll build up. If you paid on time. They will increase your limit and you can use it more, right? So that is definitely something that you would want to work on, right? For the long term per se. Totally. Then getting a business bank account again. These are simple things, but putting money everywhere and not knowing where it is, and that makes it really challenging, right? And yeah, if you can walk away from a spreadsheet, do it, because an accounting software is really going to help you. It may seem a little complicated in the beginning, though maybe not. I don't think they are. I see them being very user-friendly generally. So I think that's really invest in one. It really will make a difference come year end. If you maintain it, if you're able to maintain it, right? Well, the same with the spreadsheet. You still have to input all that info. It's not just,
It's like they say, garbage in, garbage out. Those programs are only as good as you're going to use them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, girl. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I hope we added a ton of value. I hope the goal today was to empower designers to really feel that they can manage their finances and get themselves set up for success. So I really do think you've offered some great tips and great, just even pause for reflection on how designers run their business and how they can maybe improve it in little ways. Can you just let everybody know? So thank you for that, by the way. Thank you. And can you let them know where they can find you? Because I'm sure all the designers are like, okay, why don't we just hire Etel and she can do it for us? That's what I would be thinking.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So I am a blossomcpa.ca. That's our website. You can contact me directly at etel@blossomcpa.ca. I'm on Instagram too. The business is at Blossom CPA. So there's lots of ways to get in touch with us and let us know. Like I said, baby steps. Everybody can get themselves organized.
Yeah. And I will add that you have a great email newsletter that comes out. I think it's weekly. Is it weekly?
It is weekly. Yes.
Yeah. So
And
even
I just
if you already have someone helping you, get on her email list, because I already have like an accounting team, but I read your emails because they're always very, I'm just giving you like kudos to you, and designers, we're always trying to do emails, right? It's very current. Like when you send an email, it's very like what's happening in the world at the moment. And I find that even though I don't even do my own like books or whatever, I like open it. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I want to know more about it. And you were so on top of it during the pandemic. You're like, here's what this new thing means for designers. I was just like, I just want to say kudos to you. Like very excellent content coming out in your emails.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you know what? I write them myself, so it's not that they come from some sort of other box. And I try to keep it, I think, and if you read this, you know there's that. Try to keep it super simple, to the point. So it's not like you're reading a newspaper. It's just something really concise. And here it is. And hope you like it. And that's it, right? It's great sharing information. I really think that's been really key for us as a firm. It's helped us a lot to connect with our clients, because I think that people have a disconnect, and there's no reason for that, right? I feel like we're always on touch.
It helps educate, right? It helps us all learn in like small snippets, which is, as a designer, I appreciate. Just the small snippets. Don't read it a whole essay, because I won't read it. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Etel, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, that was fun. I mean, I don't typically like talking numbers, but I will say I'm warming up to this whole conversation. It's also really great just to recap and take a deeper dive into some of the things that really help keep my business on track. And I didn't realize until this sort of came out today in the conversation, the power of that weekly meeting that I've been having with our project coordinator to just look at where we're at. Because even if it's almost sometimes not even about like how much money has to go out and how much is coming in. It's about seeing, are we using the program properly? Have we closed things off? Where are we at? Just having that quick check. And if you don't have someone in your business to help you do this, it's something you could easily do yourself, and you can outsource. Anyhow, I really hope you guys got some new information. Maybe it just helped remind you of the value of knowing your numbers and staying on top of them. Whatever it may be, I hope you enjoyed it. If you love listening to my podcast, please subscribe. That's how we let the internet universe know that this podcast has value. Also, reviews. I love seeing your... Can't talk. I love seeing your reviews. So please feel free to leave me a 5-star review, and I'll see you soon.